Good afternoon, Professor Teasdale. Today we are going to explore schizophrenia in the American criminal justice system. Today, when talking about this topic, we will touch on mental health, law enforcement, societal perceptions, and how schizophrenia is an important disorder to understand when working within the American criminal justice system. What is schizophrenia? The DSM-5 defines schizophrenia as a psychotic disorder characterized by disturbances in thinking, emotional responsiveness, and behavior. Schizophrenia belongs in the DSM chapter for schizophrenia spectrum and other psychotic disorder class. Approximately 1% of the world's population suffers from schizophrenia, while approximately 1% of Americans have schizophrenia. This disorder manifests in men typically during their late teen years or early adult years. The same goes for women, except schizophrenia can actually manifest in women all the way up until their early 30s. The symptoms of schizophrenia can be put into three different categories: positive symptoms, negative symptoms, and cognitive symptoms. Positive symptoms can include hallucinations, delusions, and disorganized thinking. Negative symptoms of schizophrenia can involve loss of motivation, loss of enjoyment in daily life, difficulty showing emotion, and loss of normal functioning. The cognitive symptoms can affect trouble paying attention and memory, trouble processing information, and trouble making decisions. Now let's explore the prevalence of schizophrenia in the American criminal justice system. In a research article titled Association Between Incarceration and Psychotic Experiences in a General Population Sample, written by Zunatari and others, the author states that in the United States, there are about 2 million annual bookings of individuals with severe mental disorders into jails. It's found that there is a higher population of people with schizophrenia in prisons than compared to the general population. The study also found that individuals with schizophrenia are disproportionately represented in jails and prisons. Through research, it has been found that people with schizophrenia are up to 4 to 6 times more likely to commit a violent crime in comparison to people without schizophrenia. Up to 6% of homicides in Western countries were committed by people who suffer from schizophrenia. Not everyone who suffers from schizophrenia is violent, but schizophrenia can develop in many violent ways. Some factors that can contribute to the development of schizophrenia in these conditions could be lack of access to mental health services, either not knowing where your resources are or living in an area that does not have adequate mental health services. Substance abuse is also a very important factor in this, as schizophrenia and mental illness overall and substance abuse go together. Substance abuse can actually heighten schizophrenia symptoms as well as contribute to crime. Homelessness also is a big contributing factor, as being homeless means you have a lot less access to resources, even more so than people who do live at homes. And inadequate support systems, when people suffering from mental illness and schizophrenia don't have people that they can go for support and help, it can become very difficult to navigate how to get the proper treatment and how to live a normal everyday life. An example of schizophrenia and violent crime. The photo on the screen is of a man named Andre Thomas. Throughout this class, this story of Andre Thomas in this article has stuck out to me the most, and it actually encouraged me to do this final project on schizophrenia. The case of Andre Thomas shows the extreme side of schizophrenia and crime. In 2004, Thomas committed a horrific crime, which involved the murder of his ex-wife and his 2 young children. When Thomas committed this crime, he said he was doing it under the orders of God. He believed that his ex-wife was a Jezebel, which was Satan's wife. He believed his 4-year-old son was the Antichrist, and he believed his daughter was a demon. He murdered all 3 members of his family, and then he ended up cutting out the children's hearts and putting them in his own pockets. He then attempted to take his own life, laying down beside his dead and now ex wife. However, his suicide attempt was unsuccessful. When Thomas realized he was still alive, he turned himself in. However, when he was put into jail, he started reciting Bible verses and then used his own two fingers to pluck out his right eye. He was then transferred to a psychiatric prison where he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Prior to this incident, Andre was suffering with his mental health for his entire life. He grew up in poverty and began drinking by the age of 10. He had started experiencing symptoms of schizophrenia in his early teens and had many attempts of taking his own life. 3 weeks before his crime, his friend actually took him to a mental health clinic, since his mental health was declining at a rapid rate and he was once again thinking of taking his own life. I find this to be one of the most polarizing examples of schizophrenia and crime, and as I believe it's a good example of how schizophrenia can manifest in incredibly violent ways, causing people to commit horrific crimes. This also can be an example of a lack of a support system in substance abuse and its contribution to schizophrenia in inmates. Contrary to popular belief, people with schizophrenia are more often victims to crimes than offenders. In the article Violence and Schizophrenia, written by Heidi J. Weering and Thomas T. Carpenter, they state that persons with schizophrenia are undoubtedly at increased risk of becoming victims of violence in community settings, with risk up to 14 times the rate of being victimized compared with being arrested as the perpetrator. Although persons with schizophrenia are more likely to be victims of violence than to perpetrate violence, the majority of the literature published since 1990 regarding violence in severe mental health illnesses has focused on perpetration rather than victimization. Here we can see how stigma plays a role in how people with schizophrenia are treated. As the quote suggests, the only media and literature coverage associated with schizophrenia that I've ever seen is all to do with the violent and offender side. Challenges of inmates with schizophrenia. The misunderstanding of symptoms by law enforcement.